It's still working on my end. I'll let you know.
It says webinar is now streaming live on YouTube, so I think
Yes, it does.
Hey, we're on YouTube.
Hey, the Zoom thing is getting smarter all the time, but
Yes, we are now live on YouTube.
thank you, everyone, for committee members and presenters, and to all the attendees. I think it's the largest group of attendees we've had in a long time, and we understand your concerns. Tonight is a very preliminary meeting. We will have a discussion by I can't read my notes.
Hey, Jonathan
Right.
Rose Companies.
With the Jonathan Rose Company and their architects of what they are planning to do. There's no decisions will be made tonight. And I will say that with 51 attendees, I do not believe you will all get a chance to speak, but I ask you to put your questions in the chat, and some will be addressed tonight and some will be addressed as we review and we go into future meetings. So thank you all. And shall we begin? Who's starting? I assume you, Andrew.
Yes, I'm happy to start. Thank you all for having us early on in the process so we could come and present our proposed plans for Shore Hill. My name is Andrew Foley. I'm with Associate Director of Development at Jonathan Rose Companies. We are builders of affordable housing across the country, but our home is here. It's where we really started, and we are delighted to be pursuing this project. I'm joined by our fantastic team. We have Brian Tews from Curtis and Ginsberg Architect, who's our project architect.
Hi.
And then we have our landscape architecture team from Matthews Nielsen Landscape Architecture, a really phenomenal team that has done a fantastic job to help us reimagine what the site could look like in the future. So we have Dan Yannicone. Hey, Dan.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us.
And we have Tone Chu as well. Tone.
Good evening.
Oh,
So,
and excuse me, just as a matter of protocol, we have the presentation, then committee members and board members ask questions, and we will do additional questions from the public as time permits. And as I said, if you don't get time, don't worry. Put your questions in the chat or email them to the board and they will be considered.
okay. And why don't I go ahead and share my screen now? Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're here tonight to present our proposal to build 136 units of new all affordable senior housing at Shore Hill and significantly improve the open space and site infrastructure on the campus. So figure what we would do is just give, for those of you who are not as familiar with Shore Hill, just a very brief background on the community, what's going on there today. Then talk a little bit about the zoning and the land use actions that we're seeking as part of this process. And then I'll turn it over to Brian at Curtis and Ginsberg, who will present the building. And then I'll turn it over to Dan and Tone from MNLA, who will present the site plan and some of the landscape improvements that we're thinking about. So without further ado, for those of you who are not familiar with Shore Hill, this is a map showing you where it is, and just off Shore Road in Bay Ridge. Shore Hill is a really phenomenal senior housing community, 558 units of all affordable senior housing for households earning at or below 50% of area median income. As you can see here, those units are located in two 14-story towers with a very active 4,600 square foot community room. The site is also home to Columbia locations for Columbia Doctors and NYU Rusk Rehabilitation. And NYU is also the resident service provider for our residents at Shore Hill. So in addition to building new affordable housing, Jonathan Rowe's companies also actively acquires and rehabs existing affordable housing with the idea of not only improving the buildings that our residents live in, but also doing substantial green retrofits to make our buildings more green and sustainable. So an affiliated fund controlled by Jonathan Rowe acquired the site in 2018 and invested about $6.2 million in renovating the campus. And I thought just very briefly, I would just go through and give you a few examples of some of the before and after shots. So you can see here's the lobby of one of the Shore Hill buildings. And this is what it looks like today. These improvements were just completed earlier this year. You can see this is a sitting room before our team started renovating it. And as you can see, transforming it into a very space that really promotes social activity. Also, all these building materials are healthy building materials. Any energy efficient appliances have been located throughout. A bunch of improvements to the building themselves. You see, hopefully most of you have had a chance to attend something at a really amazing community room. You can see it's quite active. We've since improved it. Now, in fairness, this was shot just after the building got its permit. So people weren't in here yet, but I can assure you there's a lot of people. And this is one of the most actively used spaces on the campus. And it's really just a fantastic space. And you can see this was the old kitchen, small, cramped, and didn't allow for meetings to be held very easily. You can see this is the kitchen now, really transformed to allow better use of the space. So that's what's been done to date, but there's really still significant opportunity to improve the campus. So you can see this is just a plan showing Shore Hill today. These are 3 courtyard areas that wrap around the community center. And this is the 73 space parking lot along Colonial Road. And so in addition to building more affordable housing on this site, we think this project presents real opportunity to improve the overall feel on the campus and make this an even better place for our residents to live. So this is what we consider mainly the real heart of the campus, where both building, you could see the west building and the east building here, and this is the entrance to the community center. You can see, this area gets a lot of use, but the seating is not necessarily built for people with wheelchairs. There's opportunities to improve, seating and active spaces throughout. This is the west courtyard, which is a really beautiful space. You could see on a nice sunny day how beautiful it is, but it's not accessible to our residents. As you can see, the only way to really get to it from the buildings is stairs, and so it's fairly underutilized. Here's another. This is what we call the east courtyard. Same thing. You've got stairs on either side and spaces that just don't get a whole lot of use, and there's a lot of opportunity to activate this space to help connect our residents to nature, get them outside when the weather's nice. And then if you've driven by, you've seen that, there's a kind of array of dumpsters occupying a good portion of the parking lot. And, the way that the site is configured today, this is about as good as we can do on trash, but there's real opportunities not only to make it more aesthetically pleasing, so we get the trash kind of out of plain sight, but also to improve the efficiency, to collect trash in a more green and sustainable way that lowers our carbon footprint, and something that we have our eye on doing here as well. And then last, but certainly not least, is the surface parking lot, which we have realized is fairly underutilized, actually. So we recently engaged an engineering firm called AKRF to conduct a parking study that looked at the demand for this surface parking lot throughout the week, during the week, during weekdays, overnights, and on the weekends. And what their study concluded is that out of the 73 parking spaces that exist there today, there's an average demand of about 38 spaces at any given time, and a maximum demand of only 43 spaces. So it's something that our team suspected that this parking lot wasn't fully utilized, but I think this really showed to us that there's really an opportunity to reconfigure the parking lot to make room for more affordable senior housing, which I know this committee agrees is something that's desperately needed in the community, and we need to find opportunities for our seniors to have safe, decent, and beautiful housing. So with that, before I turn it over to Brian to talk through, to present the building to you and what we're thinking about doing, I just wanted to give a brief background on the zoning and kind of the relevant pieces of the zoning for this discussion. So this is a map looking at the zoom in of the neighborhood. The area in bright red is our project site. And you can see the existing zoning districts and land uses surrounding the site. So Shore Hill, as you know today, was built as part of a large-scale residential development that was approved in 1974. We understand it was quite controversial at the time. The prior owners proposed initially to build two 22-story towers, which got everybody's attention and brought everybody out. And I know there's lots of really great pictures of packed high school gymnasiums, and a lot of energy was created around that plan. That plan was eventually settled down in a compromise plan to reduce the towers from 22 stories to 14 stories, which is what they are today. And to do that, there were a few modifications that weren't standard in the zoning that were required to make that happen. Contrary to most belief, there was no zoning done to kind of create more height. The height was as of right. It was things like the distance between buildings, setbacks to allow the buildings to be a little bit closer to the edges of the road and the rear yard than zoning would normally allow. And so fairly minor modifications to allow this site to be built back in the early 70s. Since then, a number of things have changed. In 1978, there was a rezoning to rezone a portion of the site to R31. And then in 2005, the remainder of the site was rezoned from R71 to R7A. And that's what exists here today. And you can see this outline of the R7A zoning and the little bit of R31 that is on a portion of the site. And then, as I believe many of you are familiar, because it didn't happen all that long ago, in 2016, the city did a citywide update to the zoning code, with one of the main goals was to promote the creation of affordable housing, and particularly affordable senior housing. So under what's called ZQA, or Zoning for Quality and Affordability, were a number of changes to the zoning code to really promote the creation of affordable housing to meet the just incredible demand for providing more housing around the city. So it did a number of things like give senior housing a little bit more height. It waived parking in certain areas. So if, for example, if you're inside a transit zone, affordable housing isn't required to build affordable housing, required to build parking. And a number of other things which we're happy to get into and we'll get into throughout the process. This site is not located inside the transit zone. So the existing buildings still are required to provide some parking. We'll get into that a little bit more. The new building that we're proposing that Brian is gonna take you through doesn't require enough parking to trigger a parking requirement. Therefore, it is not required to provide parking. But the existing buildings, 556 units, we have to provide a 10% parking ratio. So we need to provide 56 parking spaces on site. So what we're proposing to do is reconfigure the parking lot from 73 parking spaces to 56, which is still, as I mentioned before, is more than what our study shows is actually needed on site. So what are we looking to secure in terms of land use actions to make this project happen? So as I mentioned, the parking requirement under ZQA was reduced for this zoning district, but there's a provision that says that in order to get the parking to adjust to the current zoning requirements, there needs to be a special permit through the BSA to review that application and confirm that it is appropriate. So what really brings us here tonight is before we submit our application to the BSA, and there will be a formal community board hearing, we wanted to bring our proposal to you first to solicit your feedback. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is, because the site that we're looking to build on, which you'll see in a moment, is part of this larger residential development that approves some modifications to the existing buildings. This requires a minor modification approved by the City Planning Commission in order to allow that to happen. So we are not proposing a building that is asking for any height waivers, setback waivers. We, as you'll see in a moment, Brian and his team have designed a building that meets the current bulk regulations of the existing zoning. And so this is also not an application that will go through your typical ULERT process. It's going to go through this BSA special permit process, still providing this board plenty of opportunity for comment. What I'd like to do now is turn the floor over to Brian from Curtis and Ginsburg Architects to present our proposed building. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andrew. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm an associate at Curtis and Ginsburg Architects and also the project manager for the job. I also happen to be a neighbor. In fact, I'm close enough to the project that I received the invitation to the meeting, and if I looked out the window, I can see the site from where I'm currently sitting in my bedroom. So, we got a guy on the inside. Go on to the next slide, Andrew. Okay, so what we're looking at here is just a quick breakdown of some of the rules in the zoning that will define what we're allowed to do on the site, and ultimately really what our building looks like in a lot of ways. So as Andrew mentioned, this building itself sits entirely within the R7A portion of the property or the zoning lot right now, and it is entirely as of right, meeting all the rules and regulations of that, which is actually a AIRS, or it's affordable independent residences for seniors, is the bulk regulations that we're looking at here. So just to quickly break down what that means is the building maximum height is 95 feet up to a maximum of 9 stories. And you'll see that on the main bulk of the diagram there. On the north and south sides of the property or the building, where we have a lower density district, the R31, we are limited to a height of 55 feet, which is also equivalent to 5 stories for the building. So that's what you'll see in the darker masses to either side of that. The building itself at the street wall can be, we're limited to, or we have to meet and align with our neighbors. And in this case, it's the neighbor to the north. So we're a little further back from the property line than, then we have to be a little further back from the property line, I guess is what we're saying. And then the maximum base height of the building, which is that sort of little slab that we're showing there in a sort of medium gray color, is up at 75 feet above the base of the building. We have to set back 10 feet from the property line. And then beyond that, zoning permits us to have what we call a dormer, which is that portion of the building that's stepping up a little bit as a permitted obstruction into that setback. I think, Andrew, you can go on to the next slide now. Okay. So this is a rendering of the building as an aerial image. You can see the short hill in the background and the Verrazano Narrows and the rest of the neighborhood to the south. The program for the proposed building, as Andrew mentioned previously, is a 136 unit with a mix of studios and 1 bedrooms. They are all affordable and available to seniors making under 50% AMI, it's area median income, under HPD's senior housing program. And as you'll see from the image here, a lot of what we were looking at in the zoning diagram translates directly to what the building ultimately looks like. And we'll talk about some of those things in more detail on the next slide. Okay, so this is a view of the building standing on Colonial, looking south. So you can see the dormer. What we've done is we're breaking up the facade into separate volumes, and we step down as we go to the north, as also we step back away from the street. That creates additional articulation, limits or reduces the appearance of scale of the building down to where we have a lower density district to the north. And also in front of the building, as we step back, it gives the opportunity to give more space in the sidewalk and allow for a lot of planting at the base of the building, so our building's not sitting directly on the sidewalk. Further, you can see at the pedestrian scale of the building, we have a stone base and canopy that really reduces also and relates to the pedestrian scale as somebody's walking around the building. Has a similar sort of gesture to the the academy across the street, the Catholic school. And also that line strikes about where the porches of the buildings, the residential buildings to the north are, as you can see from that one that's shown on the right side of our diagram. And then the materiality of the building, we're using masonry and a stucco on the upper portion of the building. Then what we're really doing is we're looking at the history of the buildings around the neighborhood, a lot of which are sort of pre-war and mid-century, a lot of really nice Art Deco buildings. And we're drawing from that palette. So for these individual red brick volumes, which is something you see all over the neighborhood, we also have additional masonry and articulation around windows to create more interest in the facade. Also corbelling, which is bricks sticking in and out on the 2 portions of the building on the north and south that are at 55 feet. And the stucco finish at the top, we're looking at a lighter color that's going to diminish the that top of the building, a warm color with more of a texture to it. Again, sort of trying to nod to the history and the just sort of the feel of the neighborhood in general. And beyond that, one other thing to mention is this is going to be a extremely high performing all electric building built to passive house standards. Also, we'll have solar panels on the roof and green roofs wherever there are not solar panels. So we can go to the next one, Andrew. And this is just our last slide to show the building in its context as a more technical drawing. And what we're saying here, what we're showing here is in relationship to sort of its immediate surroundings, how the height of the building. So, just to sort of speaks for itself, but I think that you can see in the top diagram and the bottom diagram, the Shore Hill housing is 14 stories tall. Our building is 9 stories. And then a little closer, just another sort of very near neighbor, the Harborview Towers has about 10 stories. So we're sort of sitting in that realm amongst other sort of lower density houses, which is something we see all over the neighborhood. So I think with that, Andrew, I'll give it back to you.
Thanks, Brian. And so that's the new building. But another really critical component to this project is our proposed improvements, not only on the new building lot, but on the rest of the campus as well. And so, Dan and Tone, why don't you take us through our landscape plan?
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everybody. Next slide, Andrew. Like Andrew had shown earlier, the Shore Hills has 3 courtyards centered around obviously the west and east buildings and around the community center. We took we've been on site a number of times, and in this image you can see a number of the streetscape photos as well as the interior courtyards. And this is where Rose has asked us to look at the existing landscape as well as the existing uses and see how we can improve upon those, not only for the residences, but also from the street side as well. Next slide. Here is a conceptual rendering of the improvements. Starting along Shore Road, we would look to increase or embellish upon the planting that's along between the sidewalk and the building, as well as provide additional seating for the bus stop and any residences or public use. The existing trees that are on the street would remain as well. As we moved out into 91st Street, right in front of the community courtyard, there's currently a large, let's say, triangle of paving with a few benches within there. And we look to soften that area by including planting areas with some pathways that would have some social seating and benches. And like Andrew had said, for people with accessible concerns, we would provide companion seating with those benches. We would maintain the cherry trees that were along the east building between the curb and the sidewalk. And as you can see within these courtyards themselves, there's quite a bit of new improvements within there, which we'll show soon, show in a few later slides. As we move to Colonial in front of the new residential building, again, as Brian had mentioned, we look to landscape in front of the building and maintain the number of street trees that are along that road. You'd enter the property a little bit further south than is currently shown. And with this, we look to have more decorative paving. We understand that there's going to be a sidewalk that leads here from the street. And we want to provide kind of a visual and textual cue to show that there are people will be walking through between one building to the next. And so we see this more as a shared street, common to what you see like in Europe and in those areas. And then the paving would change again, where there'd be a lot of foot traffic between the existing and new buildings to designate kind of a crosswalk area. Behind the new courtyard, new residential building, there would also be an additional courtyard for those residences. And as Brian and Andrew mentioned, there would be 56 parking spaces, bulk of them closer to the community center. There are a few along the shared street. And also, I believe there are some underneath the new residential building. Along the parking spaces, there will be screening as well as and fencing as necessary to shield those areas from the adjoining residences. Next slide. This is an enlargement of the community courtyard, again, where we see the hub of the activity happening. And within there, as you look to the bottom left of the plan, you can see the additional planting areas, the additional benches within there, and we would look to rework the benches that are currently on the crescent concrete concrete wall. As you enter through there, we would improve upon the community garden plots, add additional seating and planting within there. Also back towards what's currently the breezeway, some gaming tables that you can also obviously double as tables to be able to sit at. And then rearrange and have some additional social seating as well as tables and chairs. Next slide. And this is the West Courtyard, where Andrew had mentioned before is really challenging to get down there. There's currently a set of steps leading down to the courtyard, leading from the community center, as well as leading up to the northern path that you'd have to walk down these steps. So make your way all the way down around to the trash area to an existing set of steps. And with the improved plan, we would have a ramp leading from the breezeway, coming around, and then leading you down to the lower area, where there would be a garden path that we would be able to sit and enjoy the sun. Also some additional, either as with a couple or more private seating. And then closer to the building, where it's protected from the sun, there's some social seating there as well. So this area would be seen as like an understory with flowering trees with some shade trees as well. And we see this really as a really intimate and immersive garden area. Next slide. For the East Courtyard, this is an area that's underutilized. We want to include this, have this more as interactive with the community center as well as the residences. The parking lot currently kind of cuts through on a diagonal And so we looked to build up this grade to create a usable courtyard, a multi-purpose space that could be used for, let's say, barbecues, Tai Chi, outdoor movies, and just general social engagements and events. And so that'd be another area of major activity, also including some benches and improve the landscape within this area, and also provide screening from the maintenance area as well. Next slide. And I turn it back to you, Andrew.
So as Doris mentioned, this is early in the process, and so no decisions are being made today. Really, the goal was just to present our plans and get your feedback. What we anticipate happens next is that we plan to file our applications in June. And then we understand the community board takes a few months off over the summer, which will also give more time to review and think about our plans. And then our hope is to be back in front of you for a hearing for the BSA application in September in advance of the BSA hearing in October. So with that, we're happy to turn the floor back to you, Doris, and answer any questions the committee has.
Okay, Anne, I see you have your hand up.
Could we go back to the massing drawing, Brian?
Sure.
And my
I believe
question is,
this one? Oh, sorry.
the one with the various gray shades. Yes, exactly. Okay. One concern that I have is the massiveness of the building along Colonial Road, which is, it's not Shore Road. It's a much lower scale feel along there are occasional apartment buildings, especially as you get to the higher streets, but in general, it's a low scale street. I wonder if there could be any alternate massing where some of the bulk is above the trash compacting area in order to achieve your 136 additional units, but to take some heat off of Colonial Road.
So, Anne, I think and you know, this is a helpful diagram, but also I think perhaps this might also be useful for, so your thought is to maybe could we pull some of this off Colonial and put it more in the middle of the site?
Well, I understand your desire for the number of units that will be, you know, a value for the neighborhood and seniors. But I am concerned about that massiveness along Colonial Road. I understand that the massiveness has been broken down by back and forth and receding the light upper section, but it still is a very long, tall elevation on Colonial Road. It's particularly close to the residential building upsheet in the R31, which is actually a group home for the Guild for Exceptional Children right there. So I'm concerned about that proximity. And I wonder if some of that mass along Colonial, and especially up against that Guild group home, could take place by straddling over the trash compacting area.
Right.
Brian, I know you've studied this site very extensively.
Yeah.
Want to take a shot at that one?
It's a puzzle of a site. Yeah. Certainly we would, you know, want to look into any options like that. One of the limitations that we have at the back of the site is the existing building locations and the zoning requirements to have a certain distance away from those buildings. So that's one of the things that sort of we're up against in the rear of the building, very close to maximum. And the other one that we have to address is also the requirement for legal light and air into the apartments. And we do get to a place where we start to become too close to the property line. So that's also a challenge. So you can see from some of the steps in the rear of the building, that's partially what's happening, is we're just trying to sort of, you know, get this to fit nicely into the site. So it's certainly a great thought and something we can take another look at. but there are limitations to what we, I think, realistically could do there.
Thank you.
Any other committee members? I think we have 52 comments in the chat and 7 questions. So I have not gone through all of them, but I have taken some of them. Oh, one of the first concerns, it's been brought up at least twice, are sewer and water table problems. There are definitely sewer backups there, and the water table issue. Is there any way you can address this? How will this impact that?
Oh, thank you for the question. And we did not mention that in our presentation, but yes, one of the aspects of the work we're going to be doing across the site is to address stormwater and employ a range of strategies. Dan, you may be able to talk a little bit about that, but the short answer is yes, we're aware that during major 500-year storms, there's been some pooling of water. As you may be aware, the city has gotten a lot stricter in the types of controls that are required to mitigate stormwater and flooding. And so, we as a company are very committed to building resilient buildings. And so it's something that we are very focused on doing. Dan, would anything you'd care to add just on some of the strategies from a landscape and civil perspective that we're exploring on the site?
Yes, there actually did, from my understanding, there was soil borings done, which actually it has a apparently good drainage in that area. They took a number of borings. And so some of the landscape strategies that they look to do would be to collect at this service and allow some infiltration. And then it would ultimately go to a pipe and drainage system. And so that's something where I know HRF is on the line. They're the ones that have done that site. They're the civil engineers. But from what we've spoke with them, that's positive. And the collection, I believe, Andrew, correct if I'm wrong, but the focus is going to be for the new building, but also address any concerns with the existing system.
But I think we have to look at the existing sewer connections there too, because it appears to be an issue there.
Yes, and also when the project was built in the early 70s, there was a stormwater tension system that was put in, and we've noticed that it's also can get clogged and has started to fail in points, which I think is contributing to some of the flooding folks have seen in the pooling of water. So by addressing that system through some of these improvements, we're also going to be able to really improve that as well.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came up, or concern that came up, is that 91st Street gets a lot of traffic with ambulances, doctors, and caregivers. Are you moving keeping the 91st Street entrance to the parking area?
Yes, yes, there will remain an entrance off of Colonial Road and on 91st Street.
Okay.
And we hear you, and our community team has also expressed that it can get quite busy along 91st Street, and so I think that's something we should really look at moving forward. DOT will also be looking at our project, but we hear you, and we do intend to see what we can do to address that.
I think it's an important issue to be addressed. And I would
It's a really
just
good
like I was reminded that the existing height and bulk was an agreement. It was a compromise between the community and the developers. So compromise is in the history of this structure, this facility. So compromise might be part of the future development. Any other committee members? Okay, as I said, there are 68 comments in the chat and 8 in the Q&A. So I see 3 people with hands raised. So I'm going to call on them initially. And just for everyone who has put a comment in the chat or on the Q&A, they will be reviewed and distributed to the committee members and the board for consideration and filtered and sorted and given to the architects and the developer. So I'm going to call on Karen Doan.
Hi, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, Karen, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay, so I have a couple concerns. One, I'm not only a broker, but I'm the neighbor to the backyard that faces your complex. So are you going to have windows facing 89th Street or only on Colonial? That was one question.
So yeah, there will be some windows, and I can perhaps pull up the site plan here to show.
Mhm.
And Brian, you could help fill in, but there will be residential apartments on the interior here.
Yes.
And so
Because
they will
right
have
now we have like a brick wall, you know, we don't have windows looking at our houses, which adds or depreciates the value of our homes.
Hmm. Okay.
So if you can consider not putting windows on the 89th Street side, that'd be a great thing. Something to think about on the design with the architect. And then how far will the houses be from our backyard? I mean, the parking that you spoke about, are you gonna have parking and that the apartment in front of it? Or are
So
we gonna be looking at this building that's really gonna depreciate the value of our homes?
Sure,
Depending
yeah.
on where you are here, you know, in terms of the parking, there will be actually an improved buffer along the parking that I think will actually improve what currently is there today with the parking that is already existing today. And then, you know, a range of, you know, landscaping approaches, because we understand you appreciate your privacy, and we understand that. So I think a lot of what we're looking to do is address things through landscaping. Is that fair, Dan?
Yes, yes, along the northern edge of the property, we would not only along the parking spaces, but between that and the new building, we would look to use columnar evergreens and other buffer material, as well as an additional fence to help improve fence to screen between the existing residents and the new building. And that would also be along the southern edge from Colonial Road, where you enter, yeah, right along that edge as well.
No, I'm talking more on 89th. We live on 89th. So how far is the building going to be from the wall that now exists as parking?
The building will be to the rear, I think 25 feet, and to the closest to Colonial, 8 feet for the first 5 stories, and then also 25 feet away from the property line after 5 stories.
Okay, and assuming you get completion of your approval plans, how long do you think development's going to be? When will we see this building?
So we'd like to get going on this building next year, but we recognize that he has some limited funding to do this. And so we don't have a firm start date. And we will certainly give the community ample notice of when we plan to start construction. Once construction starts, it'll be a little less than 2 years to complete the building.
Okay, thank you.
Steve Harrison.
Oh, yeah. First of all, I apologize. I had a problem with my computer, and I don't know what happened, but I'm here now. I'm on the committee, just so you know. If I missed something about the parking spaces, are you increasing or decreasing the parking that's existing right now?
We are decreasing the parking by 17 spaces. There's currently 73, and we will build back.
Okay,
50.
but I got the general idea. I don't want to waste other people's time, but the community center is right next to it. So I've been there when you can't find a parking space. Right now, you're decreasing the space because that community center is frequently used by people beyond the people that are residents of the building. Why have you chosen to do that? I mean, it would seem to me you're building a new building, which most people would increase their parking space. because I think that this is going to create a real issue of parking on many nights in that vicinity. And I think that many of the residents there are already burdened by this. I mean, sure, most nights you can go in there and I see that the parking space is open, but I am worried about the evening where there's a community activity in the community center. So why have you chosen to do that?
I mean, the primary reason is because we want to build more affordable housing for seniors. And when we looked at the parking demand, and the engineers put out cameras and see how active the space is, they've concluded that the current parking lot is underutilized. And so in addition to that, they also did a survey of street parking, that's parking around the site, and found that on any given point in time, there can be significant amounts of on-street parking available as well. Look, we get it. I mean, we're all New Yorkers, and we would all like more parking closer to where we want to be.
I truly get what you're saying. What I don't understand though is that you can say that about many parking spaces or parking lots. You go down to Zavarian High School and you look at that, and you say to yourself, okay, like most of the time there's not somebody there, but darn, a lot of times there's a lot of people there, and I don't hear anything being quantified here about what happens when there's something at the community center. And yes, I want to see senior housing. I'm a senior, okay, but I think that there has to be taken into consideration the fact that that community center there is something that is used by the community, not just by the people in that housing. And I think you have to understand the concerns of people that are around it. And I think that this is a big mistake. Okay, I concede, okay, that you can look at on many nights, if not most nights, and not see that parking lot is being used. But I can also think that you can concede that there's many nights when it's full to capacity. All right, I know the community board, when it goes down there and has had many meetings down there, okay, that trying to find a parking space is almost impossible. So to say that this is something that's not going to be burden on that community is flat out wrong, in my opinion.
And I can say, as someone who does not live in the immediate area, but who has gone to the NYU rehab facility there is not parking available. It's very, very difficult to park there in the middle of the day.
Absolutely.
And I think we need to look at current parking conditions and projected parking conditions, because as you add more residents, you get more home care people needing access, you get more doctors, and you get more ambulances. So I really think you need to see if there's any way you can not reduce the parking. So,
Doris, if I can say, I'm absolutely on board. I applaud what you're doing, but I don't think that you've justified the reduction in parking spaces. I would expect more parking, not less. And I think that's a huge mistake.
And I would just like to add another comment. You said that you have a legal, you have legal requirements for light and air for the residents. And I can tell you that many of the questions in the chat are, what about our light and air for the additional residents? So I think that has to be a consideration also. I'm sorry, but right now with the screen, I can't see who has their hand up.
Okay, I'll stop the share.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And is your hand back up again? Okay.
Brian, I don't know that one could say that the existing buildings will win architectural awards necessarily, but the building that you propose seems to have nothing to do with the appearance of the existing building. And somehow, when you add this new building looking so different, it becomes two projects and feels twice as impactful as if one were to look and say, and I'm not saying match the building, but the way it is designed, I feel, you look at the whole project and you say, well, that's another building. We have another building, as opposed to enlarging an existing. I don't feel it looks like part of the existing. One person's point of view.
Right. I think that was a decision, and we're really looking to complete the street. Where now we have all those dumpsters and just an open parking lot. So we're intentionally looking to the neighborhood and the more, not necessarily partially to the Short Hill housing. There is some merit to them, I believe, but more to the neighborhood and trying to stitch into the fabric and really complete that street. So that's definitely an approach. So we can look a little bit more at that, especially for the rears of the building.
Now I'm going to call on Barbara Deeb, one of our
Well,
attendees.
Barbara, you can now unmute yourself. Barbara?
Barbara, you're muted. You have to unmute yourself.
I don't know, she may be having,
Okay.
go to Joseph.
Yes, we'll go to Joseph Sayed.
Joseph, you should be able to
You're
unmute.
also muted.
Hi, yes.
Okay.
We live in one of the residences right next to the Guild. So my main concern really is, like I put in the chat, sunlight. And I don't know who it was that just mentioned the appearance of the building looking like two different projects. And the other thing, like Steve said, the parking. I haven't seen that many surveyors. I think if they spent more time, they would see that there is never a spot available. I have a fire hydrant in front of my house that is, I would say, blocked every week. I mean, almost every night someone comes and blocks the pump. I can't imagine having less spots in a new development, 156 more units, and not having enough spots. Yeah. Yeah, the sewer is also a huge concern. I don't know exactly how old it is. It can't hold the water that comes through there already. I don't know, 156 more units with waste running water, and I don't know how that would hold it. Do you guys have a plan on redoing the sewer on Colonial Road that would hold all of this water?
We don't have a plan to improve the sewer in the street, and it's not required. We have a civil engineering team that's been actively looking at this and have had conversations with DEP, and we think that there's additional capacity to hold, this new development.
Right, and the city really is looking, very closely at improving, stormwater retention on sites, and that's the approach that is taken. Is to make sure that the water doesn't just pour directly into the sewers and overwhelm them. So this would certainly be an improvement, over what is there right now, even though there's a new building.
And we hear your concern, and one of the other approaches we take is we build buildings with really low flow fixtures to really reduce the usage of wastewater that comes out of our residential units. So that's something we do in all our projects, more than most developers, to reduce the demand on the existing sewer, because we know that there are impacts, and as Brian mentioned, this will be a very green building, and we'll have lots of approaches to reduce water consumption.
Okay, yeah, I congratulate you on the green building and all of the low water flow and all of that. You had mentioned green roofs and solar panels. So if the building impacts sunlight for residences adjacent to this building, what does that do for the sunlight and the just the light that we get into our house for us? Like, Was that taken into consideration where adjacent neighbors lose that sunlight?
Well, so on the north side of the building, that's where is that where you're located on the north side, a couple houses up more or less? You know, and Brian, you can speak to that. I know we can, in terms of sun studies and all that.
Sure.
Why don't you take a crack at it?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there, you know, we can't say that there wouldn't be certain times of the day, there won't be some change to the lighting throughout the first half of the day, the morning, and in general, there wouldn't be a difference for that sort of east-west facing property that you have. The light wouldn't really change, you know, on the colonial facing side. And then, you know, most times of the year, I think that what you're going to see in the rear in your backyard is maybe throughout the middle of the day, there'll be some changes, but toward the evening, not as much.
Toward the evening when the sun.
Late afternoon, yeah.
So just no sun during the day.
You know, we'd have to look at I think we are doing sun studies. That's part of the environmental studies. So depending on the time of year, it would vary.
Right, like in the summer when you would be outside and enjoying the sun.
I think during the summer, yeah. You'll get more in the summer. Definitely.
But less overall than what we get now. So when do these sun studies take place?
Typically, they're looked at. There's certain rules for it that where you look at it, the different equinoxes, the amount of sunlight, different times of the day.
Right. So is that a requirement that you guys need to meet before the building gets approved, or is that just something you take into consideration?
It is not a requirement. I mean, of course, we look to consider to reduce the impacts that our buildings have on neighbors in the sun. But
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to take two more questions. Joseph Inamorato has had his hand up for a while. And you're not muted, so we should be able to hear you.
Hello,
Yes.
my name is Christine Inamorato.
Okay.
I live on 91st Street. The building that you're planning on building, which you're stitching together, one single family homes with a 9-story building is very hard to swallow that's stitching it together. A whole row of single family homes and then jutting out a 9-story building. The parking on this street is so unbearable. And guess the ambulances, the taxi cabs, the accessoride, they're living in all of our driveways, and we're all very kind about it because we understand that people need to be transported. The street is constantly shut down because of fire department, et cetera. Everybody is very patient. To add 136 more
56.
units on already an overcrowded, overpopulated street. And I don't care how low flow, unless you've got an eyedropper of water in each of those toilets, you cannot say that would not impact. Colonial Road on a rainy day is submerged in water. All of these lovely things that you're saying have absolutely are not factual, not to the residents that live here, not to the homeowners, not to the families that we're raising here. My backyard would be facing a brick wall. And you're going to tell me that only a certain time of the day it'll affect my sunlight? This project, and then to decrease, now you've decreased the parking, you've added all of these things, you're just sugarcoating all of this. Let's be honest, this has enormous impact on 91st Street, 89th Street, Colonial Road. This is not Shore Road. This is a single. We are on 91st Street. We're a single street,
Okay, thank you very much. We understand, and it's an issue that we understand. I'm going to go on to Alice Ashkar.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Alice, we can hear you.
Hi, how are you? I just want to add on to what everyone was saying. Definitely an enormous impact. I understand that they spoke about, that the city will actually improve the sewer, but honestly, like based on history and based on everything that we have been experiencing, let me just say something. I am facing the back half of the back of the current building. I wanted to comment on the gentleman, I forgot his name, that was asking about how much sunlight would his house would get at what certain times of the day. Let me tell you, my property gets half and half. And once you put a building with that height up there, you are not going to enjoy the same amount of air or the same amount of sunlight that you have right now. Since everyone else did touch on all of the issues I wanted to discuss, I just wanted to add one more thing, and that's value of our homes. The reason, as one of the ladies mentioned, this is a single family homes. These are private homes. The reason why many of us have bought around in this area is because it has a special feeling. Now, if you want to stitch another building into an already existing building, you're changing the face of our neighborhood. You're changing the face, you're changing the values of our home. You're increasing parking, as everyone else who, again, lives here and experience going around and around trying to find parking when they cannot. Decreasing your parking lot will be a disaster. But even without decreasing your parking lot, even with keeping it as is, it will also be a disaster with adding all of these units into that new building.
Okay, thank you very much. I want to move on to one more question, one more comment from Elisa Cassidy.
Elisa, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, okay. So I have my first question, fine. My first question is about the trash compactor that you're planning on putting right behind our house. The stuff that you're going to be putting in a trash compactor from a senior care facility is not going to be stuff that I want to be emitted right behind my house.
And there's going to be less airflow. So what kind of impact is that going to have environmentally?
Second of all, if we're talking about environmentally, not only did we bring up the issue of adding 136 more units, which congratulations on the green building, but it seems a little counterproductive when if we're decreasing the amount of sunlight that we get naturally, if everybody around us has to drive around more looking for parking spots, has to use lights in their home more because we're decreasing the amount of sunlight, and if there's less airflow where we're going to have to be using air conditioners and artificial air sources more and more, doesn't that kind of rule out the entire point of this extra water usage? That all adds up. So on both points of the building environmentally, it kind of fails.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Barbara, you're still muted, so I'd like to hear from you, but we can't. So I want to thank you all for your concerns. We have over 100 comments to review, and
Dora, Stephanie has a hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stephanie. I was
Okay.
looking at the list of the people.
Just a quick question. Is there or will there be completed environmental surveys for this committee to review?
So once we submit our application to the BSA will refer those applications to you to review. And then you'll also get a copy of the land use application that we're submitting to city planning. So yes, in those documents, there'll be a lot of additional information for you to review.
Thank you.
And we appreciate some of the guidance and some of the points of concern that were brought up. And I think we're going to use this and review the comments that have been provided in writing to help us prepare for our presentation when we come back to you in September with
Just
more
out of
information.
I'm sorry, just out of curiosity, when you did that parking survey, was it during COVID by any chance?
No, the city rightfully didn't let anybody do part. Well, I mean, I guess it depends on what your definition of when COVID began and ended. I guess start with that. But no, it was done in April of this year.
Of 2022?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Lori.
That was my question. Thanks,
Oh, okay.
Stephanie.
Okay, and you have another question?
Yeah, Brian, did you consider any schemes which perhaps made the tallest part of the building 1 story taller and pulled more significantly away from the 89th Street North property line?
We did not, only because they were at the maximum building height permitted under the,
right, but
which
you're
is what we're
already
proposing.
seeking other deviations from strict compliance.
So Ann, I
Yeah,
think
Andrew, you can speak to that.
And Ann, I think you've raised an interesting idea, and I think we owe you an answer on that. I mean, I think one of the challenges, and I know Brian's felt as well, is that the zoning code in the setbacks, there's an 8-foot required setback on that northern property line. And that's what that diagram attempted to do, is there's so many rules that are shaping what the building can be that there was very little options for Brian to.
Right. But senior housing is kind of like, mom and apple pie. You're going to get whatever variances you see.
But
so I wonder if, at least to consider how pulling away from the north side could ease the tribulations of some of these folks with the sunlight and looking at a tall wall in proximity to their backyards. So I wonder if you might consider it.
Let us take a look at it, and I think we owe you a more complete response to some of your thoughts. But we think we understand the concerns, particularly with the residents on the north side of the site.
Thank you, everyone. And we will review all the comments and synthesize them and see where we go next. You will be hearing more from us.
Doris, I just want to add for the attendees who are here tonight, I did note some of the comments in the chat requesting a copy of the presentation tonight. So this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, and anyone in attendance can view that meeting. We also, as part of the registration, have all of your email addresses that are part of the Zoom records, so we will be able to be in touch with you. Again, tonight's meeting was an informational presentation about the Shore Hill expansion proposal. And when the community board receives a formal notification of an application to the Board of Standards and Appeals, there is a separate public notification process to the surrounding community, which will happen again. And there will be an opportunity for public comment, and the community board will have an opportunity to listen to that public comment and provide an advisory opinion on the application. So I just wanted to mention that because I did see some of those later in the chat, Doris.
Yes, thank you. Okay. It's good to have additional senior housing, but changes and big buildings are always a concern to our community.
Thank you all. Anna, do you have your hand up again before we conclude? I wasn't sure, or if it was up from before.
Okay. So Josephine and I will try to synthesize some of this, and we'll communicate more with the committee, and we'll all talk more.
And Andrew, we'll compile the comments in a report to you as well.
Thank you. That's
okay.
Great. We really appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to come in early.
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Okay, Doris, I'll turn it over to you for a motion to adjourn.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? Second? Okay. Thank you all.
Have a good evening,
You'll
everyone.
be getting some reading to